Hello everyone, this is Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be talking about Major Hurricane Larry and yet another tropical system in the Gulf with a very active tropics over the next 2 weeks. So if you do like weather-related content, please subscribe to my channel as I will upload daily updates to keep you ahead of the storm. So let's get right to it. First of all, let's start off with the rainfall totals over the last 2 days. And gosh, we've had historic flooding from the remnants of Ida. I mean, yesterday was it was devastating for the Northeast. I mean, those pictures out there are grim. I mean, look at the totals. I mean, it double digits. We talked about this. I was very concerned about this system going into a higher risk, getting the type of rainfall setup like we saw in western Tennessee, unfortunately, with that potential catastrophic type flooding. Unfortunately, that unfolded last night in and around Jersey and New York City. I mean, Central Park had over 3-inch per hour rainfall rates at times. That almost doubled what they saw in Henry, which broke the record. So, I mean, that was just extreme type of event. 100, 200-year rainfall, event took place last night with serious flooding. And unfortunately, I think the last count from Ida was up to 16 casualties now, and 8 of them was in New York and Jersey last night. So, man, Ida has been a powerful storm, wrecking billions of dollars of damage. But man, it left a lot of rain back here. I mean, this trough of Nora. I mean, we've seen some heavier totals in and around the desert Southwest, even parts of Southern California, reaching in parts of Los Angeles yesterday. But man, we've got a very active development in the tropics over the next 2 weeks. These are the events that are just now unfolding. So we talked about the MJO possibly going out of active phase 3, going into a lesser phase of phase 4. Now it seems to slow down in phase 3. And Philip over there at the Colorado State University put out this forecast this morning. And yes, he has a PhD in atmospheric science. He runs the department up there at the Colorado State University. And we have a very active next 2 weeks over September the 2nd through September the 16th timeframe with the latest development of the MJO. Look, I mean, it was an active phase 2. That's where we saw Ida. That's where we saw Grace. It looked like it was going to go into more into 3 and eventually into 4. It is extremely slowed down. So it's going to remain over the next 2 weeks right on the borderline of 2 and 3. So that puts the tropics, unfortunately, in a very active setup at the peak season. So this is my concern over the next 2 weeks, because look at the chart. Typically, we peak out in hurricane season on September the 10th. This is when you're climatologically the highest favored time frame of seeing tropical activity. And we've got an atmospheric science that has a PhD in the subject saying, hey, we're going to be above average from that. So that is extremely concerning to me, what we have lies ahead over the next 2 weeks, especially with Larry now getting to be a major hurricane. And then we also have another active system in the Caribbean, but there could be more in the way as these things are really going to start to ramp up over the next 2 weeks with this setup that's coming ahead. So let's go over what we have. I mean, this is the typical Atlantic named storms formation between 1966 and 2019 to just kind of give you an idea. It's extremely active. This is the most active time in hurricane season. So it's extremely concerning that we have, a call saying, hey, it's going to be above average from that. And so this is where you typically would see in the little dots depict on the intensity of where major hurricanes have taken place. But all across the board, from the main development region to the Atlantic and to the Caribbean, as well as especially in the Gulf of Mexico, we look to see a very active, storm formation this time of year. So let's take a look at the JMA too. So this is also concerning because this particular model comes out every Thursday, and this is the latest update from this morning. And you can definitely see, I mean, we're going, look, I mean, this is the Gulf of Mexico. These blues right here, that is your upward rising motion air. You've got the orange, that's your sinking air. Look, I mean, as it gets closer into the Gulf of Mexico, as it gets closer into land off the East Coast, we're not seeing any sinking air to deal with. So that is extremely concerning, especially with Larry heading west-northwest. And then we have that disturbance heading into the Gulf of Mexico. There's not much sinking air to be going into that environment. And if we look beyond that, it even gets worse. And that's why we're calling for a bullish setup over the next 2 weeks, saying, hey, once these things get closer into the U.S., closer in the Caribbean, closer in the Gulf of Mexico, closer into the East Coast, the things turn around, and we've seen that as rapid development in close to land, like we've seen over the last couple of weeks, being on those active phase 2, what we've been in. So we're going to be St. Giddy's going back and just remaining in those active phases for the next 2 weeks. So this is definitely extremely concerning. What may be to come in the tropics over the next 2 weeks. So here's the setup currently. Fortunately, we've got Ida that left a lot of havoc over a good chunk of Louisiana, all the way up through the Tennessee Valley, and then yesterday was extreme into the mid-Atlantic states in the Northeast and southern New England. Fortunately, Ida is moving offshore, so they got a lot of cleanup, and there's so much damage and so much flooding that took place up there. But now this is the concern going forward. There's that Central American gyra type setup down here in the Caribbean. This is going to be slow to develop, but like I mentioned, once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, things become a lot more favorable over the next several days, and it should be entering the Gulf probably sometime late this weekend. So definitely by early next week, we could be looking at an active developing tropical system in the Gulf of Mexico, in the western region of the Gulf, and it looks to be maybe a Mexico or a Texas or Louisiana again. So I'll show you the different scenarios, but man, look at Larry out here really getting its act together. This is expected to move west northwest and be a major hurricane, if not tomorrow, and then expected to be a category 4 hurricane. And there's some intensity models saying, hey, we could actually bump up to a 5. Is not out of the question with Larry. So here's the setup what we have from the NHC. There's that disturbance down here in the Caribbean. That's going to be kind of slow to develop, but I do feel over time, once it gets out into the Western Gulf. Remember, a lot of the data with Ida pushed it well into Mexico, and with every update, it was lifting a little bit further north and eventually lifted into Texas until we got a low-level center. We couldn't say it was going to go to Corpus or New Orleans, but once it did, the path really started to tighten up on Louisiana, and it really didn't deviate that much over that last 4 days of the hurricane track. So yes, I mean, over the trends of these cycles we've seen of late, yes, not out of the question. It's not implying, say, hey, this thing's going to Mexico. I would not let your guard down in Texas or Louisiana for sure with this system as we look at the data in the days ahead. So and there's Larry. I mean, it's a formidable storm, and it's still way out to sea, but it's definitely concerning, the trend that I'm seeing, that it could get a lot closer to the East Coast than what a lot of people thought just two or 3 days ago. So let's take a look at what we have here. This is Larry. It's now a hurricane, expected to be a major hurricane as early as Saturday afternoon. And then if not, a category 4 hurricane on the cusp of a category 5 out here and way out here in the Atlantic, as conditions continue to remain favorable, that Larry's going to be around a while. But definitely concerning the longer this is able to stay out to sea, as there's going to be high pressure going to be building. We'll go over this. That's going to possibly bring this closer into the East Coast. And a lot of people didn't have this on their radar just 2 days ago, but now it's definitely a little bit more concerning to me, saying, hey, there's definitely scenarios out there that it could get a lot closer to the East Coast. So let's take a look at some of the ensemble member guidance from the latest GFS. I mean, the GFS seems to be a little bit ahead of the European model on these tropical systems this year. And it's been pretty bullish on this system out here into the Caribbean. It has a lot of ensemble members taking it into the Gulf of Mexico as well as off the coast of Texas and Louisiana. So that is definitely concerning. But also Larry, I mean, look, there's a high pressure that could be forming over Bermuda here. Larry could have the possibility to sneak under that high pressure. And if it does, if it's able to do that, that's going to be able to swing this a lot closer into the East Coast. That's going to be a pretty too close to comfort. And so let's take a look at the intensity guidance. I mean, this is pretty active, guys. I mean, it's expected, even from the National Hurricane Center, to go up to a Category 4 hurricane, but it's not out of the question it could bump up to a 5 at times. Luckily, that is out in the middle of the Atlantic, but you can just tell the dynamics that Larry has to work with of a very active system. It's definitely a little bit more concerning. This could get closer to the East Coast than what may have looked like just 2 or 3 days ago. So let's take a look at the spaghetti models, kind of implying the same thing. It's got a lot of members out here. So it's a good probability that Larry is going to be out here sometime by next Thursday, as we could be dealing with that tropical system possibly make an impact into Texas, into Louisiana by then. And let's take a look at the latest European anomalies, the precipitation anomalies. You always look for what they consider hotspots of potential paths of where the storm may go. And yes, it's definitely implying that we could be looking at above average rainfall precipitation in a lot of places that just don't need the rain. I mean, look, this storm's implying, hey, it could be going to Texas, but a little bit more favored into Louisiana, and that's the last thing they need after Ida. But look at this. I mean, we've got well above average anomalies popping up in the Northeast, as well as the outer bands could be approaching from Larry by then, with possibly more very heavy rainfall entering back in the picture. So this is two places that desperately don't need the rain, and this is extremely concerning to me to see this type of setup that of these events that could be unfolding over the next 7 to 10 days. Here's the latest GFS model. Again, kind of saying the same thing. It's the bullseye right into the Gulf of Mexico as things start to get active. Not as active looks possibly as the European on this particular run, but it's still implying that this is the likely favored of it trying to get its act together and possibly making landfall into Texas or Louisiana sometime next week, with more heavy rain off the coast of the Northeast. And the Canadian has been the most concerning model, and it's been actually pretty congruent over the last 2 or 3 days. It's been saying this actually the last 2 or 3 days. And again, you do not want this scenario to unfold. This would be devastating impacts for Louisiana again, in a lot of the same exact areas that we got hit hard. So I hope this does not happen. But again, this is another area this particular model has been really consistent over the last 2 or 3 days. So we're starting to see these things coming together, say from the GFS, the European, the Canadian. All this data is trying to come together and say, hey, we could be looking at a more active setup, especially as the MJO will start to slow down in a lot more favorable phase 3. So that is what's elevated my awareness from these particular systems, saying, hey, this definitely has the potential to be another major event unfolding over the next 7 to 10 days. And because the rainfall would be extreme. I mean, if the Canadian played out, this would be devastating. I mean, these are double-digit totals, if not up to 20 inches of rain. So I'm not saying this is going to happen, but yeah, definitely the trends are going in that direction, unfortunately, as we could be looking at another active setup and going back into the Northeast as well. So yes, this is definitely concerning. We're seeing more and more model data starting to come together as some of those bullseye areas that unfortunately don't need this. It's the last thing they need at this point. Here's the wind swath of the Canadian model. It could be potentially a storm, but as you saw with Ida, once it gets out into the Gulf of Mexico, and especially as the trends are setting back, you saw the JMA, we're not getting the sinking air, we're getting upward rising motion air, especially as we go in the later half of next week. So things just could start to come together that it could be really start to intensify again as it gets closer to land. So that is definitely concerning. But here's the thing of what happens with Larry. This could push underneath this Bermuda high. This is the setup by next Tuesday timeframe, September the 7th. There's the Bermuda high still steering Larry west northwest. So if it's able to sneak under this high would deepen again over parts of the northeast off the coast here. This again would pull it away. We could possibly be looking at another landfall into Louisiana, worst case type scenario. But this would also imply that Larry could sneak under this Bermuda and get closer and closer and closer towards the northeast by that next Thursday time frame. So this is definitely something I wanted to make you aware of, to give you plenty of advanced warnings of this potential dangers that could be lying ahead. So I know there's a lot to cover today, so I appreciate you guys staying with me. Do like this video, definitely leave your comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to catch the latest update where I protect you before and after the storm.